there was a time where I was searching for it and I found it, and I'm good.
Yeah.
I'm not like scared of it, but like I feel like I get it, and I don't want to. I already don't believe that this reality is real in the way that we've been sort of programmed to believe that it is. I don't believe that at all. That already makes it really difficult to operate and do like, Zoom calls or have a conversation with someone in my family. It's like already makes it difficult to like, do that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so I take it in balance. It's like when I feel like I need to kind of loosen up and kind of find that spiritual self, I will go to that place when I feel the need to. So yeah.
Okay. Can we talk a little bit about the text that you're writing at the moment?
Yeah, that's a huge question. So maybe if you want to dive into one particular thing, I'm happy to. Or I can kind of.
Well, let's talk about how it came about first of all. Because do you have a writing background?
I haven't been. So the short answer is no, but I have worked in and out of ad agencies and marketing agencies and things. I've ran a couple myself too, and I've written a lot of like copy and like headlines and things for like ads and stuff like that. So I have writing and experience in the way of like capturing an audience and understanding how to like impact something through writing, but not as far as like a novel or something. No. So ironically today, excuse me, I released a piece in my series called Pənʌmbrə, which I started beginning of last year around this time. And that start to that series is really what lent itself to a lot of other things over 2023, including the Testaments of Syncretica that I'm referring to it as. And what happened was I have a collector of mine who collected the very first Pənʌmbrə piece, Pənʌmbrə 3. And we had a conversation a few weeks after that, which is, again, almost like a year or so ago now. And we were talking about sort of my body of work and kind of going through different things. And as we're going through things, I had some things that are kind of dark and more like occultic, at that time. And then things like these explorations of ultra consciousness and like, these enlightenment things. And I made a comment about how like, oh, I know how different all this stuff looks, but I'm trying to like, kind of narrow it down and whatever. He was like, his response to me was something that kind of changed the trajectory of everything that I'm on. And was like, no, actually, I see them all as being on a spectrum, but I don't know if you've identified like what that framework is yet. It's like from dark to light, and that's what that is. And so that made me start to think about, I saw this reoccurring problem of, well, I guess problem of opportunity, I guess, but of being in different shows and group things and exhibitions and this place over here and this thing or whatever, this drop or whatever. And I see a lot of artists like kind of just shooting from the hip from that stuff. And like, oh, I'm going to make this thing for this one thing. I'm making this thing for that other thing. And to me, I felt like it was almost like a trap of creating something different for other people rather than what it is I was doing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And if I'm going to have these opportunities, which I wanted to have, I needed to have like a through line. I needed to have a core philosophy behind what it was that I was creating. That way, especially with AI, which is so open, you can create so many different things. Like, why limit yourself to one look, one visual aesthetic? But you also have to achieve some semblance of congruency so that people understand that it's your work. And so if you're changing styles, if you're changing aesthetics, what is it that can be that core? That's like a new problem. I don't think a lot of, traditionally artists tend to work in one thing for a long period of time and it evolves. But in this space, you do it really quickly. And so I started to develop a framework for my work that I started to refer to as Syncretica, that basically represents like 11 different tiers or levels or entry points into this kind of core philosophy of things. And that's how it started. I started working with ChatGPT, and I've made a ton of different LLM bots and all these different things. And I started kind of writing out almost like core philosophical tenets of things and how, you have to have a balance of dark and light with everything. And there's a lot of different ways to look at that. It's not just, if you take like a traditional religion, Christianity, Buddhism, whatever else, it's very strict to take all of this or take none of it. And to me, I don't really adhere to that. And I like the fluidity of being able to kind of tap into different ideas at different times. And so that's what I basically started to build this idea of syncretica around. So there's different, what I'm referring to now is testaments as I'm writing it. And each one is, I've written 2 in full in drafts so far, and there's 11 total. They're all mapped out in terms of framework and outlines and stuff like this. And they touch on a variety of themes such as astral projection, sort of like power through the occult, but having balance, naturalism, singularity through technology, different types of things like that. Yeah. And each one is being written in a kind of a, I would say somewhere between like Homer's Odyssey versus like a biblical type of text. It has that type of prosy feeling to it and structure, but the story themselves are not like, Jacob on the hill. It's much more like labels of things like the traveler, the dissenter, like the whatever, and kind of having like labels of ideas of entities and characters that aren't supposed to be something that's real, but they're supposed to be representative of philosophy. And so, yeah, that's maybe the quick and dirty version of it.
So it's more fictional things you're writing in a non-fictional background, I guess.
It's definitely fictional. I don't think that it's like a novel though. It's much more quotable, I would say, in a way, if I can maybe relate it to that. Like, people have like, like John 3:16 or something,
Yeah.
Like I now have like Pənʌmbrə 6:21. And it's like, and therefore the traveler sat in front of the doorway and began to walk through this dimensional experience or whatever. And it has much more like each line is almost like a piece of wisdom or something. And I'm utilizing the workflow is working with AI across the board. It's ChatGPT for like framework and outline development, Poe and custom LLM bots that I've created in order to have like narrative structures, and then working with Pseudo-Write for the bulk of like the grunt work of the actual writing. But I'm developing all the outlines and the character structures and editing as I go. Right now, I'm actually on track. I don't know if this will happen or not, but I'm actually on track to, when I'm done, it may end up being the largest modern day religious text in the world. If that ends up being the case. So by the time it's done, it could be a massive thing. And everything that I'm working on visually, artistically, is also based on it or branches from it, which was the goal, which was like the initial goal in the first place, was to have it be these like branches of things. But it's really fascinating because there's like these weird like synchronicities and stuff that ended up happening too. And things like line up in a really weird way that feels almost like providence or something. It's like it's very strange. Sometimes you kind of hit these weird rhythms. You're like, whoa, that's really weird that it would be like this because I did that here and then this was here. And it just these really weird alignments of things, which a part of me loves that. And another part of me is just like kind of like weirded out by it, but it's been quite the experience, and I'm absolutely loving it. It's something that is a surprised enjoyment of being able to write this stuff and doing it at such a high volume. And so quickly, it's like living a creation that it's happening in real time. It's interesting because it's like I'm writing it, but I'm also not writing it. And, I'm writing it, but the AI is writing it, but I'm controlling it and directing it in the very similar way that I use AI for visual works. And I kind of like start reading it back. I'm like, oh my God, like this is amazing. Like, I love where this is going. Like, oh, what if I did this instead? And like, I kind of shift and move it and then rewrite this chapter and restructure this and go back here and add a piece here to reference this and then sort of like layer it all in. And it's very, it becomes very complex, but it's something that there's like all these different like breadcrumbs to different areas and branches of things. And it becomes its own world of things. It's really fascinating. Even from like my perspective doing it's very fascinating. It's like, I don't know. It's wild. Yeah.
It's almost like you are guiding the knowledge. Like totally. You are hand holding it to be where it needs to be. That's sort of how it sounds.
It's like, so I've talked about this a little bit in spaces before, but going back to being an abstract expressionist painter, like this is one of my paintings. I have them all over stacked up against the wall here in my office. Something that I've always thought about when it comes to expressionism is you're not really wanting to be fully in control. In fact, I think the less control, the better, the more influence, the better. Like you're influencing what is occurring. You know, I go get, you know, tree branches or using chopsticks as with paint on it, or shutting my eyes and kind of do something gestural or whatever. Like I'm influencing it, I'm directing it, but I'm not controlling like what's actually occurring. I look at working with AI in a very similar way, like philosophically and workflow wise. That's how I look at it. Even with the visuals and things too, working with it from a visual art standpoint, I never really want full control. I think a lot of it is, especially when you look at like the photorealism type of things and the ability for things like Midjourney, which has gotten really, really good at what it does, the ability for it to get very, very realistic, which is still kind of hard to do, I think, depending on what you're trying to do. I think people are like rushing towards perfection in that way. And to me, like, I like rolling the dice a little bit. Like I want to see what it'll do, and working with it from a writing standpoint, I'm taking the same philosophy with that. And it's like I'm creating these outlines and this like kind of number line of things, but it's filling in the gaps. But I'm still like twisting and turning and changing it as it goes in the way that I would take something and start compositing other things with it visually or whatever. It's the same process. It's just a different medium. But my thought processes have been very similar with it.
Amazing. That's so interesting. And I'm very, very excited to see this text when it's done. What's the ETA?
So it's a monster of a thing. And what I'm trying to do, I don't know if this is gonna be possible or not, because it's a pretty lofty goal, but I'm trying to have all 11 testaments drafted by April 1st. I don't think that's gonna be possible. I gave myself that as somewhat arbitrary goal. It's probably gonna be over 800,000 words.
Wow.
By the time it's done. I've written Pənʌmbrə. The first testament is based on Pənʌmbrə, and that one's about 70,000. And the second one I just finished a week before last, and that one is over 80,000. And there's other parts I'm adding to those that I haven't done yet. And so I've already written like 200-300 page books at this point by doing this. So the idea of doing like 9 more before April 1st sounds crazy, but I'm trying to like set, you know, some type of cadence with what it is. And I've also organized a small group of people to help me with like feedback and sort of like bouncing off ideas as I go, as I can't really do it alone. After I finished the first one, I kind of got a couple people together that have been interested in the project, and just like allowing them to kind of give me feedback as I go. And I'm not like sort of in a silo for it. So I doubt that date will be something that hits. But it'll keep me on track to a certain degree. The real question is how long will it take to edit it? The editing process is going to be very fascinating because you're not going to have like grammar or spelling mistakes, but you're going to have these like really, what ends up happening is like these really weird patterns start to emerge over time, especially at that high volume. That's going to be something that's going to have to be edited. And so I'm hyper aware of those things, but right now I'm just sort of like building the huge block of marble at the moment in order to like chisel it down. So we'll see, but I got to have the whole draft done first. That's essentially how I'm looking at it.
Yeah, absolutely. Would you foresee this to be going on the blockchain? Is it going to be printed physically?
Right now, I don't have like a concrete answer for that. That's almost always the question. I know for a fact I would want at least some physicals of this made. I also would love to have it actually published. And each testament would probably be its own volume. So yes to physicals. As far as it being somewhat on the blockchain, I'm not quite sure exactly how I would do that, but I would want to do that one way or the other. I also have thought a lot about doing, because I'm not naive. I know that it's not something that's easily consumable, especially in written form. People can't read a whole tweet, much less, you know, a 900,000 word document. So like, I don't really, you know, I just don't see that being like easily accessible in that way. But so I have a couple other ideas, such as having sort of like an audio version, podcast, maybe reading like one chapter, you know, per episode or something for a couple of years or something like that. Like that's an option. And then the last idea that I've been working with too, because I've worked a lot with making custom LLMs at this point, is basically creating a full custom LLM on each testament. So you'd be able to, people would be able to go and interact with the chatbot more or less. That would be built on a testament. And so you'd be able to, each one has a core character. And so I would basically create a custom data model on each core character and allow someone to like pull the wisdom from that character by having a conversation with it. And then they could reference things like, oh, well, as what happened in, you know, Vicium 2113, it's this, you know, and this is what happened with this, and this is the wisdom from that, or whatever. I could see that happening as well. So I think that'd be like a really interesting new tech way to go about doing it. But I also see that being like way down the road too. So I think, you know, there's a couple different ways that it could come to fruition.
I'm very excited to see what happens. It does seem to be the perfect pairing for you. It's almost like spirituality, that narrative meets tech. It seems to be absolutely your kind of signature thing. So I think that kind of accessible way, which involves AI again, would be ideal way to for everyday people to access your work and reference it.
I think, you know, something that I find, you know, with Syncretica in general, as I said earlier, with like religions, I think that it's not something that's like you don't have to take all of it, you know. That's sort of how I look at it. Where like if you vibe more with like the naturalism, you know, idea and concept, like it's like entry points. Like I look at it as like entry points. So if you're more like darker occult type of philosophy, there's something like that for you in it. You know, one other thing is I work with a group called Strange History. I'm not sure you've seen the Strange History people. Just so much fun, such an amazing group of people. But I started doing started thinking about doing a collection for Super Rare with Strange History, and long story short, I ended up creating something called the Age of Syncretica, which is like an alternative. All the Strange History is like alternative timelines for things. That's just to kind of give the audience something for some context. And so what I wanted to do was think about, you know, what if Syncretica was real, and like how that would affect. If there's like a global religion, like what would that actually have to be, and how would that affect things? So I have like almost a third person kind of narrative around looking at that one thing. But that actually drove me to actually begin writing it itself, where it just was a framework for things at first. But as I started developing out that story in that world of things, I started thinking about like what would the actual document be to have a full global religion. Like what would that be? What would a one world religion actually look like that would give proper framework and understanding for the current time that we're in, that's not based off of these like myths from the past that are like really hard to associate with now? Like what would that be? And the answer to that is what I'm trying to create. And so it's an interesting process, because the art and the collections and all these things all reflect back onto the actual thing that I'm writing, and it reflects back onto them. It's like this very weird, I wouldn't say circular, but almost like a spiral type of relationship as time goes on, and they all start kind of like syncing together in one way or the other. And that's something that I find to be just like almost, it's a very beautiful process. It's like, I don't know, it's but yeah, I just want to kind of throw that out there too, in a way of a reference point.
It sounds like it's almost like a self-fulfilling process.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's like, you know, there's a group that I did something with around Halloween, and we did this thing called Horrorwood, and it's like a branch off of Strange History. And it's like the story of like sort of like this town called Horrorwood, and you know, over time, it's like 4 of us artists, and each one sort of did a different timeline. We kind of have our own story and stuff. It was photorealism, and mine I took in like the 1700s, and there's like you know, there's a whole story that's built around that, and almost turned into like to witches kind of a thing. But in a way, you empathize with them, and it's like almost like a positive thing. But during the creation of that story, there's like this sort of moment where the main characters like cast it out, you know, and her sort of coven of people are casted out, and they're trying to find something. And one of the pieces in that collection is just her in like an empty field holding a book. And I made that book into the Testaments of Syncretica, and it was almost like an Easter egg, as we were talking about, like, oh, let's have Easter eggs and stuff in it. And because of that one thing, that directly affected the way that I just finished writing the second Testament, which is more about like the dark and occult type stuff. And I wrote it from the perspective of like, what would influence that storyline for them to do that thing? What would be in a book that they would want to harness to use that would happen in that story? And so it becomes this thing where like one thing touches on another thing, and it kind of, as you said, it's almost self-fulfilling in that way, and it help drive the narrative. So yeah, it's weird. It's very fascinating though.
Oh, so interesting. We're kind of coming up to time. So do you have any last questions for Blac?
Just one question. What tools you prefer to use to generate your work? Like I saw some of the animations as well, so I'm very
Mhm.
much interested in that as well.
Yeah, so I use mostly right now. I use Midjourney as a base for things.
Mhm.
I use Stable Diffusion a lot. In fact, I actually have my own proprietary AI that I worked with a developer to build in late 21, early
Wow.
22. That was based off
Mm.
of VQGAN and VDiff. So I use that a lot at first, and then Stable, and then Midjourney. Um, and most of what I do now is out of Midjourney, but I tend to try to like break it and like make it do things it doesn't want to do. The more progressive it gets, the more it wants to be perfect, and the more I want to like break it from that. So
Mm.
I tend to, that's sort of the philosophy of use, I guess. But then I use almost everything, especially like the piece I released today, Pənʌmbrə 6. Everything is like heavily composited, and it's sort of like an amalgamation of like all this stuff together. With Pənʌmbrə, for example, it's based off of like textures that I've taken photographs of like oil paintings and blended them in with like scenes that I'm creating. And, so it's like this weird sort of mixed bag of almost, I would say, like mixed media in a way that goes
Mm.
into it too. And not in hardly anything at this point is just like a straight prompt that I put out. Like nothing is like that. So as far as animation stuff goes, I have not, I'm not one that does animation very well. I've tested, I've worked with Deform a little bit. And back in, a year or two ago when they were in collab with Google and on a Google collab, I should say. And I worked a lot with that, just like testing stuff out. But I wish I was better at animation, but I'm simply not. I don't really have time for it.
Yeah, it's time consuming. I think Procreate released a new animation software, so if you want to
Mm.
look into animation, you can look into it. I
Awesome.
am going to do that too because
Oh, are you?
I animate the old way
Mm.
where you have to create a different frame for everything, like frame
Mm.
by frame thing. But I think they released a new version where you can actually animate the object the way you want.
Mm. Procreate is so user friendly.
Yeah.
I've used it here and there. I have it, and I use it when I do more like hand drawn type
Yeah.
of work on top of it, and I enjoy it for that for sure.
Yeah.
So interesting. Blac, thank you so much for being on today. You're so absolutely interesting. I would love to have you back on again, maybe
Yeah,
once
absolutely.
your text has progressed a bit more and we can kind of talk about where you're up to and what's influenced you recently. But
For sure. Yeah, I would love that.
yeah, you're awesome. Thank you so much. Have a lovely Thursday evening.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the
Thank
time
you.
and an opportunity to chat. So anytime.
Yeah, you're awesome. Thanks, guys. Have
Have
an
a great
awesome
evening.
day. Bye.